But 1 second, you think I'm just gonna miss that detail that I said earlier? 5,000 workers and 1,700 groups of horses. It couldn't all just be British. Well, it wasn't. It was Chinese navvies, Chinese workers. Now, it was difficult to find enough railway workers in British Columbia, as they were just near the end of their settling days and finally in. For one thing, not everyone was interested in such dangerous work. Much of the work involved use of dynamite, which is awesome, to blast rock out of the way. Many lives were being lost to blasting accidents. Most men in Canada who were available to work on the railway construction were already employed east of the Rockies. The population of British Columbia was very small. The numbers of workers that were needed could not be found there, so the railway began to employ Chinese workers. There were about 3,000 Chinese in the province in 1878. The first Chinese men to be hired had already worked on railways in California. Many had came to British Columbia because of the gold rush. Even with these men, there was still not enough labor to meet the needs of constructing the railway. By 1885, there was 15,000 Chinese workers employed on the railway. Workers came from China hoping to earn enough money to return to their homeland with some savings. They earned $1 per day, which was less than the $1.50 per day offered to their workers. The average wage in their home province in China was 7 cents per day, which is a big improvement, but there's still the value of the dollar there and here. Improvement, but think about it again. Not as big as you think. But anyway, railway workers were not paid during the harshest 3 winter months. When work came to a standstill, they also had to pay for clothes, food, shelter, and taxes. The Chinese workers had to make payments to cover the steamboat trip from China. When the railway was completed, many of these men could not afford to return to China. About 5,000 of the Chinese workers stayed in Canada after the railway was completed. Work on the railway was hard and dangerous. At least 600 Chinese workers had died during the construction of the British Columbia portion of the railway. This was a cost of 4 men for every mile of track. Some died in dynamite explosions or accidents, others from scurvy and other diseases. Some even fell off the cliff simply like an idiot. I mean, they fell off sadly. Their families must be horrified, I think. But in conclusion, all these workers that came from China, or at least a good portion of them, came from China as cheap labor to build the railway. How else do you think they could get 6 kilometers of track laid down each day? That's approximately 3 miles at least. Now as we head farther into the construction, more deaths, more explosions, guns and explosions in Michael Bay. There came a time where the railway was finished. There was a celebration for it. It was called the Last Spike. On November 7th, 1885, at a place called Craigashell in British Columbia, Donald A. Smith drove in the last spike of the Canadian Pacific Railway. The railway line completed under the leadership of William Cornelius Van Horn. It ran 4,660 kilometers from Montreal in the east to Port Moody, British Columbia, in the west. Now, in the end, the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, it was finally completed. All that work done, deaths of the Chinese workers, lots of benefits for the country, and it became a monument in Canada. There's been multiple different statues and monuments laid down for the war deaths of the Chinese navies, workers, and much more to remember the work that has been put into this railway. The important men are now passed away, knowing of what they have done to help the country through military, through business, through transportation, and keeping people in touch. There were many lives sacrificed in the making of this railway, Some people going back home to their families. But just remember, a simple railway back then could be much more than it is today. Don't judge a book by its cover. Look into the book and you'll see way more about it. It's a story about this railway. Seemed like a simple construction, yet there's much more to it. Something much deeper. And as you could see, it was not just any construction. It was the largest one in Canada at the time to help the country. It predicted the future and kept Canada safe from America coming in and taking our land. Goddamn Obamacare. Anyway, this will conclude my presentation. But there's one more thing that I want to say. One more. It's almost time again. And when it's time, it'll be good. For you. But for me, the better or the worse.
It's a society that makes sense going to a bad position. When these gender roles get switched upside down and a new age shall come. When people find that different, and they'll find us to be freaks, the time will come where they will be found normal.
I know, but every time I try, there's no final way to explain it. I will finish this.